Okay, so any society needs some method of decision-making, some kind of political system. The most common political system used in current-day bourgeois democracies is representative democracy. This system, however, has many serious defects. One of the biggest defects is that votes in supposedly representative bodies often don't reflect the views of a majority of the population. Here's an example. The Trump administration in the United States had a tax bill. According to a report at the time, a third of the voters supported the bill, and other surveys showed that opposition to the bill was much higher than any support. But yet, the vote in the House of Representatives was 227 to 205. That was more than a 52% majority in support of a bill that a majority of the population did not support. So what accounts for this divergence? So here are a couple of reasons in the United States today: gerrymandering, voter suppression, and the role of money. So gerrymandering means drawing political districts in such a way as to benefit one party or another. So it was estimated that in 2010, 59 seats, this is in a body of 435 seats, are shifted per election due to partisan gerrymandering. This little diagram here shows you how you can do it. So by clever, devious drawing of the lines, a population that is 60% blue ends up with 60% red representatives. A second reason that representatives don't represent people is because of voter suppression. The Government Accountability Office estimates that voting turnout is decreased 2 to 3% as a result of voter ID laws. These laws say in order to vote, you must present certain kinds of identification, but these are kinds of identification that older people, students, poor people, Black people are less likely to have. Another tactic is disproportionately closing polling places in minority communities, thinking that if you only have a few voting places in African American neighborhoods, the lines will be long, people will get discouraged, and voting turnout will go down. And finally, purging voter rolls. Now, there's some sense in which you go through voter rolls and make sure that if somebody has died or somebody has moved, they no longer are on the voting roll. But the vote purging takes place in a very partisan way. And finally, of course, there's the role of money. Countless studies have shown that money makes a difference in the outcome of elections. Here's just one study: money matters, and therefore the people's will is not being reflected. Now, here's the thing. Even if there were no gerrymandering, no voter suppression, no vote buying, representative bodies will still not always represent the views of the people. All the criticisms I've made of representative government so far could be fixed within the structure of a representative government. Here's why. Imagine a country that has 5 regions, and each region has exactly 20 voters. So there are a total of 100 voters in the country. Now assume that there are 2 political parties in the country, red and green, and their number of supporters is indicated below. So in this district, there are 12 red voters and 8 green. Here, 4 red and 16 green. If you add up all the red and green votes, you have 44 red voters and 56 green voters. So the green voters have a pretty decisive edge. But if each region elects a representative to send to the parliament, the Congress, the legislature, the representatives are 60% red, but the population is 56% green. So you have a mismatch between the people and their representatives. Now, there's another reason that the views of representatives might not correspond to the views of their constituents. When a voter votes for a candidate, that doesn't mean that the voter agrees with the candidate on every issue. What it means is that you agree more with that candidate than you don't agree, or you agree more with that candidate than you do with another candidate. And note that if we had alternative voting systems, like ranked choice voting, or if we had 3 candidates and 5 candidates, etc., none of those things would solve either of these problems that I've identified with representation. There's another problem with representative democracy, even ignoring the problem of corrupt or lying representatives, which I haven't discussed. Representative democracy treats politics as strictly instrumental. That is, it's a means to an end. It's a way to achieve a decision, but it's not a value in its own right. But in fact, political participation is intrinsically worthwhile. It gives people the experience of controlling their own lives. Adam Smith's famous comments on the mindless workplace apply also to mindless voting for representatives. Smith said, "The man whose whole life is spent in performing a few simple operations of which the effects too are perhaps always the same, or always nearly the same, has no occasion to exert his understanding or to exercise his invention, finding out expedients for removing difficulties which never occur. He naturally loses, therefore, the habit of such exertion and generally becomes as stupid and ignorant as it is possible for a human creature to become." And the same thing happens with voting. If we let others do the politics for us, we become as stupid and ignorant as it is possible for a human creature to become, and we have fewer ties and understanding of our fellow human beings. So because of all these defects in representative democracy, many have proposed that we adopt some form of direct or participatory democracy. There are several forms of direct democracy. One of them is referendum democracy, where every issue is put to the population as a whole. Modern technology makes this possible on a vast scale. People could use the internet first to access as much background information as they wanted, so they would be informed voters, and then they could vote on their preferred options. But even if technically possible, would we really want to spend so much time exhaustively studying the many hundreds of issues that national legislatures currently take up each year? But there are other problems with referendum democracy as well. Who formulates the referendum questions? With referendums, one votes an issue up or down. There's no opportunity for deliberation, for compromise, for trying to find a consensus. Politics produces people as well as decisions. People who make decisions only via referendums have no experience deliberating and compromising with their fellow citizens, and thus don't build bonds of solidarity with them. Now, this is actually one of the strengths of representative bodies. Representative bodies do afford an opportunity to deliberate, to consider the implications of a proposed course of action, and to seek refinements, compromises, and consensus, something that referendums can't do. So there's another form of democracy, direct democracy, autonomous communities. Fully autonomous communities, small communities, are a way to combine the benefits of participation and the benefits of deliberation. But there are several problems with autonomous communities. Either they are too small and thus can't function effectively or provide adequate diversity, or they'll be too large to permit face-to-face direct democracy. The second difficulty with autonomous communities is that many problems are not susceptible to small-scale solutions. Now, to be sure, autonomous communities could reach voluntary agreements with one another to address these problems, but sharing and cooperation need some decision-making procedure. If the agreement of all is required, there will be times when the self-interest of one community will prevent an agreement that is in the best interest of the majority, even the vast majority of communities. And this then brings us to a third form of direct democracy, the one that I advocate, nested councils. Small councils linked to one another. Everyone gets to participate in a primary council. The council is small enough for face-to-face decision-making and real deliberation. Many decisions will be made in these councils because the decision affects only or overwhelmingly the members of that council. But because there are many decisions that affect more than people in a single council, the councils affected will have to coordinate their decision-making. This means the councils will have to send delegates to a higher level council. And if the decision affects more than one of these higher level councils and the population that lives within that council, they would in turn send delegates to a third level council, and so on. How large would these councils be? That would be decided on the basis of a society-wide decision based on experience, revised as time went on. But the basic idea would be this. The councils would be small enough to guarantee that people can be involved in a deliberative procedure, face-to-face discussions, but also big enough so there is adequate diversity of opinion included, and so that the number of layers needed to accommodate the entire society is minimized. The procedures and cultures of these councils would emphasize discussion and accommodation rather than scoring debaters' points and vanquishing one's opponents. Participants would be expected to give reasons for their views framed in terms of the public good rather than self-interest. Crucially, the councils would operate by consensus where possible, but majority rule where not. The problem with just relying on consensus because you respect people's opinions and you want to take them seriously is that you also want to respect the views of the majority. The delegates from one council to the next would be charged with trying to reflect the actual views of the council they came from, but they would not be mandated. That is, they would not be told, this is how you must vote. For if they were mandated, then the higher council they would be attending would not be a deliberative body. There would be no point in having debate because everybody has to vote the way they've been told to vote. But though not mandated, these delegates would be much more representative of the people they are supposed to represent than in standard representative systems. They are chosen by a small council whose members know them personally. The delegates are part of and constantly returning to their sending council. The delegates are rotated, so no one delegate serves too long. And the delegates are subject to immediate recall whenever the sending council no longer feels the delegate represents them. Most importantly, however, what prevents the unmandated delegates from usurping power is that the higher councils will only vote on matters that are relatively non-controversial. Whenever a vote is close, the issue is returned to the lower councils for a decision. So delegates go up to higher level councils, deliberation takes place, refinement, compromise. If eventually no consensus can be reached and a vote is needed, if the vote is one-sided, that's fine. But if the vote is close, might this represent that same issue of indirect election that plagues representative democracy as well? To avoid that, you go back to the primary lower level councils for a decision, but not for every case, just for the cases that fall in these special categories. So having the lower level councils decide is more democratic. So you might say, why not send every issue back to the lower level councils for decision? And this is where our concern to avoid overdoing participation with excessive time demands comes in. By sending back contentious issues or those so requested by the citizens or the lower level councils, we have a check on abuse of power by the delegates to the higher level councils. But to send everything back would simply be a waste of time. We would have the same problem as if we voted on every single decision every time. So far, I've been talking about how we need to defer to the majority. We reject a political system where the rich or the well-born or the meritocratic rule over the majority. So in that respect, of course, we favor majority rule. On the other hand, we also care about the rights of the minority. The majority should not have the right to oppress the minority or tell the minority what it can say or think or believe. Any good society will have restrictions on the majority entrenched in some sort of constitution. If you've got a constitution, does that solve the problem? Well, no brief document is going to be able to provide a full elaboration of what these rights entail. So we'll need some means of interpreting the Constitution, a task performed in many countries by a Supreme Court or a High Court. But choosing the judges for these courts presents a real dilemma for democratic theory. If the judges or justices are appointed or chosen by some system of indirect election, particularly if they have long or even life terms, then they are removed from majority control, and they may not reflect the views of the majority of the population. On the other hand, if judges are directly elected by majority rule, then they'll reflect the views and passions of the majority and not provide strong protection for the rights of unpopular minorities. So the way that I propose to address this dilemma, which is a dilemma across the board in democratic theory, is analogous to the model of the US jury. The US jury is chosen randomly from the population. And so in the same way, I would propose choosing a small group at random from the population to constitute council courts. These courts will review decisions made by councils to see if they interfere with basic rights and constitutional protections. Like current day juries, these courts will be deliberative bodies, though unlike juries, they would have a longer term than a single case, perhaps staggered 2-year terms. As a cross-section of the population, these council courts will be democratic bodies serving to check the democratic councils. Redesigning political institutions alone can't assure a decent political system. A good political system needs a good economic system. But if we have a participatory economy with equity in terms of gender, sexuality, and national, ethnic, and religious differences, then a system of nested councils seems an appropriate political structure. Nested councils can only achieve democracy, participation, and equality, however, if 1, issues can, whenever desired, be returned to the primary council level for decision, and 2, if there is a means of protecting minority rights that is consistent with majority rule, such as by using a random selected group of citizens.